Today for our daily cancellation, we will respond to a video from a YouTuber named Professor Dave of the channel Professor Dave Explains, where presumably Professor Dave explains things. The channel has an impressive 2 million subscribers, and this video was sent to me by several people promising that it contains a formidable argument against my position on gender ideology. One person, in fact, says that Professor Dave debunks my movie, What is a Woman? And I'm quite interested to see that, so let's go through this together.
Everybody seems to be furious about trans people. Half of us are furious that they exist, and the other half are furious about what the other half is saying. I would like to jump in and see if I can clear up some of the ways that people are talking past each other. Now, it's no secret that I'm a bit on the liberal side, but rest assured the left is not going to get away scot-free on this one. They're missing the mark on a few key points. But as tends to be the case, it's bigots on the right who are the main problem, so let's start there.
We're off to a rough start. Putting aside Dave's smug, know-it-all tone and demeanor, something that seems to be a matter of instinct for people like him, so I'm not going to hold it against him. The real problem is that in the very first sentence, he's already wildly and intentionally mischaracterizing his opponents. In 30 seconds, he gives us a straw man and an ad hominem. He's doing that in the first 30 seconds. He's beginning this way, which signals that he doesn't have much to offer beyond this point, because if he actually planned on making a compelling argument, he wouldn't come out of the gate breezily dismissing millions of people as bigots. Sorry, not millions, billions. Because anybody who has a problem with basic concepts of gender ideology is a bigot, he says, which means that almost everybody in the world and who has ever existed in the world is a bigot. Professor Dave begins the proceedings with that declaration. He also lies about the nature of the opposing argument, and he does it in the laziest and frankly dumbest way imaginable. He says that the people on the other side are furious that trans people exist. Now, in reality, as he's well aware, we're not furious that trans people exist, but rather we deny the underlying premise of gender ideology. If we're furious about anything, it's that this ideology is being imposed on society, and especially on children, and it's causing great harm in the process. By saying that we're furious that trans people exist, he gets to dismiss all of us as a bunch of angry, spittle-flecked rage clowns, when he is also quite well aware that when it comes to this subject, nearly all of the angry, spittle-flecked rage clowns are on the other side of the discussion. Take, for example, the people threatening to kill me and accusing me of genocide for making a documentary where I am only visibly angry one time briefly when addressing a school board that covered up the rape of a student, so perhaps you'll excuse my emotions in that case. But the other point of this mischaracterization is to pretend that we're angry at trans people personally rather than critical of the claims made by trans activists. Overall, it's a mess, and we're only 30 seconds in. Let's continue.
The primary issue is people who deny transgenderism. These are the people who spew the tired Fox News talking points. Liberals say there are 89 genders and anyone can identify as a hamster, that sort of thing. It's a deliberate caricature of reality peddled by all the angry conservative dudes popping up in my feed lately who claim that nobody can define a woman. Let's all take a moment to acknowledge the problems that go along with the ambiguity of language. Sex and gender are different words that refer to different things. If you did not know that, now you do.
So we have another common rhetorical tactic from the left, and honestly, I'm quite disappointed to hear common rhetorical tactics when I was promised an utter destruction of my worldview, and I was looking forward to it. Professor Dave says it's a tired Fox News talking point that there are a lot of genders. But that's not Fox's talking point, that's his talking point. This is indeed the official position of the gender ideologue. They may disagree on how many genders, but they all agree that there are a lot more than 2. Some say there are infinite numbers. Facebook says there are 58. If this sounds insane, that's not Fox's fault. As for sex and gender being 2 different things, I totally agree. Sex refers to biology, while gender is a linguistic term that refers to words, but was co-opted by a pedophile sexologist named John Money and applied to people in a vague and ambiguous way. Dave never mentions that point. He doesn't seem to know where his own ideas came from, or else he doesn't want you to know. Ignorant or deceptive, you decide. From here, Professor Dave provides a basically correct definition of sex with a long digression into intersexuality, and then gets around to talking about gender. Let's listen to that.
Gender is a different phenomenon. It is still biological, but it is a neurochemical construct. This means that ultimately it is still genetic in basis, but it absolutely is not determined merely by the sex chromosomes. It is tremendously more complicated, and researchers are still working to understand the biological basis of gender identity. Human psychology is complex. People need to deal with that. Thoughts and feelings are ultimately chemical phenomena. We all have a neurochemical profile that guides how we think and feel, and part of that is gender identity. The reason that we are just now becoming equipped to differentiate between the two phenomena is that in the vast majority of humans, somewhere between 99 and 99.9% of all people, gender identity aligns with biological sex.
So gender identity has a neurochemical basis because it's a feeling, and feelings can be traced back to brain activity. Okay, sure, I'll buy that. The question is whether those feelings reflect reality. That's the question. An anorexic person feels that she's overweight. The feeling is a biological phenomenon in the sense that it's happening in her brain in the same sense that a man feels like a woman. But we understand in her case that the feelings are disordered, incorrect, wrong, delusional, and so we work to treat her brain, her feelings, to more accurately align them with reality. We don't say that the anorexic is trans-obese, and we don't call actually obese people cis-obese. We understand that there's physical reality and then feelings, and sometimes feelings are out of step with reality, and when that's the case, we usually understand that the feelings are the issue, they are the problem to be solved, and so we try to solve them. Will Professor Dave address that objection in this video? Spoiler, no, he won't. In fact, he won't honestly engage with literally any objection raised by the opponents of his ideology at all. Won't even try. Common theme with these people, but let's keep listening anyway.
The unfortunate linguistic coincidence is that we use terms like man and woman, or male and female, in describing both of these phenomena. That is where the confusion arises, when people insist that one term must encapsulate both phenomena at once. So when someone asks, "What is a woman?" expecting to get a very simple answer that children can understand, they are sorely mistaken. The answer requires a discussion of genetics and neurochemistry.
Well, I'm sorry you find it offensive, Dave, but yes, I do deny the concept of gender as it was conceived by John Money. You accept that concept as gospel. You're offended that anybody disagrees with it. That's your problem. Meanwhile, you say that the definition of the word woman is complicated, but please note that it's complicated is not a definition. So you still haven't defined it. I never insisted on a simple definition. I simply insist on a definition, any kind of definition, some sort of meaning. You can give me a complicated one. That's fine. Go ahead, try me. Give me a complicated definition. I'm perfectly fine with that. But you must have some definition, whereas you provide none at all. See, this is a major problem for you, Dave, and let me try to explain why. It's a problem because, and listen closely, you are using the word. Do you see why that's an issue? You say the word woman is complicated and apparently ambiguous and hard to understand, yet you use it. You refer to women. You talk about women. I bet you'd even say that you believe in women's rights. Would you say that? I bet you would. This must mean that you have some solid, comprehensible idea of what a woman is, yet you never explain that idea. That's a very big problem for you, Dave. You're using a word that you cannot or will not define, which means either that you're hopelessly confused and we should dismiss you and your arguments for that reason, or you're evasive and disingenuous and we should dismiss you and your arguments for that reason. Either way, you and your arguments are in really bad shape right now. Let's continue.
The acceptance for suppressed sexual orientations came first because around 10% of people are gay, whereas a much smaller percentage of people are trans. But this is the natural progression of societal evolution. Nearly every binary has been shown to actually be a spectrum, and it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes conservative people.
Wait, what? Nearly every binary is a spectrum? Like what? No, I'm not uncomfortable with that. I just think it's nonsense. I mean, in a certain way, I'm uncomfortable around people saying stupid things, but that's all we mean by that. What are the binaries that turned out to be spectrums? Don't say gender because that's begging the question. I don't agree with John Money's concept of gender at all. It's not that I think gender is a binary. It's that I think it's a totally useless and incoherent concept that should be put back into the world of linguistics and grammar where it belongs. As for sex, if that's not a binary, then what is it? There are males and females. There are those who are of the nature to become pregnant and those who are of the nature to impregnate. There's no third sex, it's a binary. So where is the spectrum that everyone thought was a binary? Can you give one example? As for the claim that 10% of people are gay, where did you come up with that? Where'd you get that from? Well, I'll tell you where you got it from. You got that from Alfred Kinsey, who made that claim in his book, Sexual Behavior of the Human Male, which is the same book that contains a chart documenting the orgasms of infants. He arrives at his arguments and his figures about human sexuality by interviewing sex offenders and prison inmates and lying and pretending that he surveyed a cross-section of the population, but he didn't. So that's where you're getting your information, Professor. I just thought you might like to know that. Let's watch a little bit more.
Now, as promised, with the indictment of conservatives complete, I turn to liberals and the missteps they are enacting that are preventing resolution. Number one, please stop saying things like gender is a social construct. No, it is not. It is a biological construct. Society can't turn you trans any more than it can turn you gay. Gender is determined biologically.
His indictment of conservatives was complete without ever approaching the vicinity of any one of our actual arguments, and then he turns to criticize liberals to prove how fair and objective he is by slamming them for not being liberal enough. He also says that society can't turn you trans, totally ignoring the fact that in our society currently, and only in our society, only in the West, there has been a many-fold increase in trans identification. If that's not society turning people trans, what is it, Dave? Now, I don't know what you'd say to that because, as always, and like literally every other gender ideologue I've ever spoken to, and I guarantee I've spoken personally to many more people on your side than you've spoken to on my side, but like all of them, you don't attempt to grapple with any of the logical inconsistencies of your position. But I ask again anyway, if society can't turn you trans, why are we experiencing an unprecedented skyrocketing rise in trans identifications? If you say that there have always been this many trans people, but they were all in the closet, you'll then have to explain why there was never, ever, at any point, ever, a mass epidemic of people committing suicide because they were not affirmed in their gender identity. After all, a staple doctrine on the left is that lack of affirmation is dangerous because it causes suicide. Well, then why was that never happening back when there were millions and millions of supposed unaffirmed trans people? Indeed, why is the suicide epidemic happening now when trans people are so affirmed? Here's my answer. Gender ideology is a modern Western social construct that didn't exist until it was invented by psychoanalytical quacks and then parroted mindlessly by people like you. Further, while pretending that it affirms and nurtures people, it actually leads them into self-destruction and despair. The evidence bears that out. The evidence is entirely on my side, in fact, and not at all on your side, because on this topic you are wrong about nearly everything, and your underlying claims are so nonsensical and incoherent that you can't begin to explain them or defend them, and that's why you don't even try. Which is a long way of saying, Professor Dave, that you are today canceled. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with all your friends.